So this is a homework check walkthrough app. All right, let me show you. I'm going to switch to screen sharing, and then I'm going to show you the app I'm going to go for today. Let me restart this. This is what we're going for. It's a simple counting app. So there's two shapes with two counters. When you click them, they count, but they count up a random number between 1 and 3. And then whichever shape has the higher count, it turns red. If they're tied, wow, they should both turn green right away. I'm not sure why that stopped. But so the red one's higher, green if they're the same, red one's higher, and then the sum's down there. That's it. So I'm going to start with a new design. Okay, and certainly there are some different choices you could make when designing this. I'm not necessarily looking for you to duplicate the UI. I mean, obviously I'd like it if your version looked pretty good and stuff that was, supposed to be centered is centered and not just, haphazardly scattered, but you don't necessarily have to, for instance, even pick the exact same shapes that I do. But I've got a text title up there at the top, so that's super easy. I call this Dueling Counters. I've used the Harry P font, but I'm going to skip the fancy font at this point. I've got two shapes, so I've got a circle and I've got a rectangle. I've got another rectangle here. This could be a line that you make the stroke thicker on, but for me at least, it's easier to just make it a rectangle and scrunch it down to the thickness that I want and put it in place. And then I've got two more text objects for the counters. I'm going to just create one of them and customize it the way I want it. And then I'll copy it to save myself the extra step of, changing all this stuff. So we'll get a bigger font. How's 48? You could use a fancy font if you wanted to. We need to change the color, so I'm going to hit say a kind of a dark gray, darkish gray. All right, and if I'm happy with that, and I like the size, I like the font, I like the color, then I'll just copy it, and that way I don't have to go through that same process. I'm trying to get them centered at 160, and then I need the one at the bottom, so I could duplicate that again, but I'm going to need to change the color, unless you want to add a gradient background. I need a color that'll show up. Okay, so that's the basic UI. Trying to get everything centered. One centered. All right, everything's at 160. Looks pretty good. Obviously, there's no functionality. Let's save it so that if something does happen, I will have it. So I'm going to, I already have a folder for this, so I'll call this Dueling Counters Live. So because this was already running the main.lua in that folder, it refreshed and is now running this version of Dueling Counters rather than the one we started out with. So we need to, you could put the circle and the number, each of these into a display group. So you could have circle display grouped and square display grouped, and then you could add the tap listener to the display group, or it doesn't really matter. You can just add it to the shape. So just to be a little bit quicker, I'm going to add it to the shape. If I was planning on doing something really wild with the entire counter, like transitioning it in some way, then I would want it in a display group, but I don't have any plans to do that. So I'm just selecting the circle and then I'm adding the tap listener. And let me pop that stack out and zoom in so that hopefully you guys can see it a little better. And then same thing with the square. Select the square, hit add listener, add the tap listener. If I save it now, that's what you should see. Okay, so we need counters. We need two counters because we have two different counts. So I'll create a snippet and call it app variables. And I need two, so I'm going to call them count one. started out at 0, and count 2 started out at 0. And I'm going to, just out of habit, move it up to the top of the code. Does not, strictly speaking, need to be there since I'm not using it yet, but I will use it in these two snippets. So let's do the counting. So for the top, the circle shape, we want to be in the tap handling snippet for the circle shape. Here's all the default code. I'm going to remove it. And then pretty simply, we need count1 equals count1 plus. And so instead of just counting by 1, I'm going to use the random number generator, which is math.random 1, 3. So that should get us a random number between 1 and 3. And then I want to update this text display object with that count. So I'm going to hover and notice that it's object 5. So I want object 5 dot text equal to count1. So let's just save it, see if we've got that working. Yeah. All right. Let's do the other counter then. So I want to be in the snippet for the rectangle, its tap handler, which is right here. We're just going to count 2. So we're going to say count 2 equals count 2 plus math.random 1, 3. And then I want to update the on-screen number, which is here, and it's object 6. So I'm going to say object 6 dot text equals count 2. Let's just test that. All right, it is looking pretty good. So we've got 2 counters going. There's a sound effect, and there's also the whole color change logic and the sum. So I guess let's do the sum next. So I want to update this text display object anytime either of these is tapped. So I need code in both of the tap handlers. I just am adding count 1 and count 2, and I need to put the result into object 7. So I'm going to say object 7 dot text equals count 1 plus count 2. Let's double check that and make sure that works for. There we go. 5 and 1 is 6. 5 and 5 is 10, 12. All right, so that's working, but it's only working for the circle, you'll notice, because I need this line of code also in the tap handler for the rectangle. So I'm going to copy it and then paste it in the tap handler for the rectangle. I didn't have to change it at all because it's in the different tap handler. It's the same exact line of code. Object7.text equals count1 plus count2. I also do want to add some logic, and that logic is going to also need to be in response to these taps. So let's test this, but then probably it does make more sense to make our own function and then call that function. But just testing this super basic version right now, you'll see the counters are working, the sum is working. You know, we're halfway there. So, but I'm going to make a function. And I'm going to go to the functions menu and choose new function. I should note I'm using a new version of Drawing to Code. I'm testing it and watching the Java console as I do this, but this creates the function with a snippet in it. I'm going to move it up to the top, and then based on what we talked about last time and the glitch that was in the version from last time, I say probably don't edit this area. You can edit it, but you maybe shouldn't. Instead, edit the function that I've given you. So I have a new snippet here, and the function, I want to give it a name. I'm going to call it update, and then I'm going to copy the code that does the sum into here. So I want to grab it out of here, and I'm going to put it in this snippet here. And I'm calling this snippet update UI, something like that, because we're going to update visibly what's on screen. We're going to change the colors. So I'm going to go back to this tap handler where I took that code out of, and I'm going to call my new function by saying update. So that fixes the circle. Now I need to go for the rectangle. Here's the snippet for the rectangle. I'm going to do the exact same thing to it. I don't need this line of code. Remember, it was a duplicate, and it's now in the update function. So to run it, I need to say update. That will call my update function. That's a big change, so let's test it. All right, looks like it's working fine. Okay, so let's head back to the update function, the snippet that's in it. So here's where we need some logic. The goal was to make whatever color is higher, red, and if they're both equal, to make them green. So I need an if statement. And it's super easy. I can just use count 1 and count 2, right? If count 1 is greater than count 2, then I'm going to need an else of some sort and an end, so I'm just going to type my logic out so I don't forget anything. So if count 1 is greater than count 2, I want to make the circle red and the rectangle, change it back to white. I need to know what the object ID is. So the circle is object 2. So the syntax to change the fill color is object : set fill color. And then I need an RGB value. So the RGB value for a red is some high number in the red, and then a 0 and a 0. But in addition to changing object 2 to red, if it's the higher count, I need to change the rectangle back to white, let's say. So it is object 3. So I'll say object 3, set fill color. White is fine, so that could be a 1 or a 111, doesn't matter. All right, let's think about the else. So I actually want to test. I want to know else if count 2 is greater than count 1, then I'm going to copy these 2 lines just to make the typing a little bit easier, although I have to switch them around. So in this case, I want object 2 to be white and object 3 to be red. Let me add a little bit of spacing in here to maybe make it easier to read. Okay, so if count 1 is greater than count 2, I'm making the circle red. If count 2 is greater than count 1, I'm making the rectangle red. And then otherwise, they have to be equal. So if they're both equal, I'm going to set their fill colors to green. So I'm picking easy colors. Okay, so unless I screwed it up, we've got if count 1 is greater than count 2, object 2, the circle is red. If count 2 is greater than count 1, then object 3 is red, which is the rectangle. Otherwise, they have to be equal, so I'm going to set them both to green. Let's see if our colors work. Hey. Hey. Well, all right. We did have a sound effect, so let me add a sound effect. So that's in actions, load sound. You could use whatever sound you have handy. I just happen to have a sound effect in the folder, which I grabbed. Now I've got my load sound in the stack. I'm going to move it up to the top just so that it starts doing that right away. Then I want to play the sound, so I'll need a play sound. And I'm going to put it into the update function. So as is, this should play every time every time it's clicked. All right. So what else did I say I wanted? We've got counting, we've got color changing, we've got sound effect. So I did have, I don't know if you noticed, I did have a little jiggling effect here. It uses a little bit of logic too, if then logic, so it fits in the chapter, but I'm creating a timer. So it's in the actions menu, so you hit timer to get yourself a timer action script object down here. When you do, it creates a function, and the function will be called by the timer however you tell it to call it. So I'm going to say call it 20 times and do it every, I don't know, 1/10 of a second, something like that. And then inside of the timer handler, well, it doesn't matter. I'll leave the default stuff because that'll send out this message to the console every 1/10 of a second. So what I want to do is I just want to move the title back and forth. So the title is, for me at least, is object 1. And it should start out at 160. I was trying to be careful and see it's at 156. So I was not nearly as careful as I thought, but I was having trouble with my keyboard. So I'm going to put it at 160 and find my timer snippet again. So I want to move it to the right. So it's object 1.x. I want to move it to the right half of the time and to the left half of the time. So if object 1x greater than equal to 160, then object 1.x equals, I'm going to move it over 20 pixels, so I'll say 180. Else, if it's greater than 160, I want to move it to 180. No, I want to move it, let's do it the other way, 140. And then else, I'm going to move it to 180. Let's see if that does it. Yeah, it is kind of annoying. It doesn't end up, with this code, it doesn't end up centered, which just kills me. So I want it to end up centered when it's done. There is no on-complete for the timer, but we can count the number of times the timer runs, and then if it hits the last number, like 20, then we can do something. So I'm going to add another counter to my app variables, and I'm going to call it, how about title shift count? But you could call it any identifier you wanted to. That's actually kind of long to type, so I'm going to copy it so I don't mistype it, given how I'm typing this morning. So I'm going back to the snippet that we're working in, which is the snippet in the timer. And since we know the timer's working, I'll get rid of this. So now in the timer, I want to increment that counter. So I'm going to say title shift count equals title shift count plus 1. So that's just a count by 1. And then I'll add another check here that says if title shift count greater than or equal to 20, then I'll put my in so I don't forget it. And then what I want to do is put object 1 back in the center. So I'm going to say object 1.x equals 160. Let's see if I've done that right. Hey, it did it. Okay, so we've got color change, green when tied, sum is working, sound effect is working, and when it starts doing counters, jiggles to get you kind of excited for the game. I think that's everything I wanted to cover and test you on. And you can finish this and email it to me with the sound effect. I'll need it. So whatever folder you've got this in with the sound effect in it, just zip that and then email it to me.